Alright, hello everybody. And yeah, before you say, oh my god, this is another Yandere Simulator video. Well yeah, it is. Get a grip, because this one isn't all about necessarily clowning on the developer.
I'm aiming to complete her before 2017.
But it is going to be an in-depth analysis on what he messed up and what in my opinion he doesn't necessarily deserve hate for, and how his fall from grace can teach us all some valuable life lessons. We're going to take a look at this drama from both points of view, YandereDev and Dr Apeis, in the hopes all this information can come together and give us a more constructive message to others. So, let's just delve back a bit. I came across Yandere Simulator for the first time around a few months ago. This is when lockdown first began. After being introduced to Doki Literature Club a few years late, and seemingly selling my soul to Monica, I slowly found more and more of this game mentioned around on YouTube. Being the curious boy I am, I decided to take a look into it further. Now, let me make one thing certain, I'm not into anime at all. Doki Literature Club and Yandere Sim are like the only games of this type which I've ever really found myself interested in, to say the least. I mean, once you're watching a video about a game where you become a high school yandere girl that brutally murders any opposition in order to make sure nobody gets in the way of their true love senpai, you just have to take a moment and think what exactly went wrong in your life to get to this point. But the concept of this game genuinely intrigued me, and before I knew it, I was
Following the development of Yandere Simulator.
Oh, that voice. Lovely. Originally, I wanted to message YanDev myself to try and get some of his opinions on some of the stuff I talk about in this video, since I'm hoping that I can give both sides of this drama, but let's be honest, I think Dr Apeis is winning this by a long shot. Unfortunately, I don't think he was a big fan of Noah's call from Coronation Street and I never actually got a reply from him. Therefore, I've had to use the combined power of my 3 brain cells to source pictures and videos from all sorts of sources online, and I spent quite a while researching this, so I hope you enjoy. So, let's start by going way back and finding out who YandereDev or Alex actually is. So, Alex, or YandereDev, is an indie game developer that has a degree in animation and has actually had a lot of great game concepts over the years. After quitting his side job as a freelance programmer, he decided to take on development of one of his ideas that blew up in popularity, that being Yandere Simulator. Being an independent developer, as he has brought up many times, it is hard to make a game with mechanics as complex as that of Yandere Simulator. He opened a Patreon so that people interested in the project could help support him and bring the project to life as such. Making a game like this from scratch, granted, is very hard and very time consuming. However, the concept was very promising and would in theory make a very fun game, so people were more than happy to support him. So, as soon as the game gained more traction on the internet, popular YouTubers and content creators found themselves making videos on this brand new game that nobody had ever really seen anything like. As a developer might do at this stage, he started to integrate more and more features that don't add to the core functionality of the game in order to impress the content creators playing this game, like little Easter eggs and stuff like that they can mess around with. Which is a good idea. This wasn't a problem at first since it made things better for content creators helping to push the game out to a bigger audience. But it got a bit out of hand when Alex decided to make a whole mission mode instead of focusing on the main priority of getting the actual demo done with the first rival, Osana. Even so, lots of developers do this, and as long as they knuckle down on getting the main content of their game finished, it should never be a problem, right? Well, in the case of Alex, this knuckling down never seemed to have actually happened. As the years progressed, people got progressively more frustrated in his seeming lack of effort when he has promised to deliver a good game. As time went on, people started to question his efforts and what he was actually spending his time doing, when years and years went past with no notable progress.
Stick 'em up! This is a robbery! Give me all your valuables! Put all the money in the bag! I'm robbing you!
People would start to criticise his coding abilities by taking decompiled versions of the game's code, which is actually said to be very inefficient and he's had a lot of stick for it. But I don't necessarily think this is as true as people make out, and we are going to talk about this later. Anyhow, several memes will be made about him not developing a game properly by copy-pasting Unity assets, which leads on to our next bit. So, Alex has been known for not handling criticism well at all, which is actually a bit of an understatement. Maybe when you were back in primary school living the good life of a year 1, someone might have called you a poo-poo head. Understandably, you might get very upset and would proceed to scream at them, telling them how they are the bigger poo-poo head. But if any adult were to intervene, you would be told that the best way to deal with people who are harassing you or trying to purposefully upset you is to just ignore them. They lose all their sense of achievement, and when they don't get a reaction back, shortly enough, they are finding someone else to call a poo-poo head. And this is something that you learn as a literal child, but unfortunately, YandereDev doesn't really seem to get this concept, not only spending countless hours of his time trying to disprove people whose sole intentions are to wind him up, but also dedicating an entire page to his website where he tries to debunk statements from people hating on him, even people who are genuinely trying to offer advice on what they think could help improve the game, end up being harassed by Alex.
So, yeah, I just saw your latest video, and I came up with an idea, and I wanted to suggest it to you. And I also wanted to ask a few questions about...
Shut up.
You left me.
Unfortunately, constructive criticism is the best possible way of obtaining other opinions to help learn from what the game doesn't do so well and what it does. But Alex didn't seem to be too much of a fan of it. And yep, you've got it doesn't stop there. Alex seemed to become so insecure about his game that he began silencing people and running a literal dictatorship on his Discord and YouTube channels. Yeah, he even went a step further to buy out the Yandere Simulator Reddit to silence anyone attempting to criticise his game in the slightest, resulting in a huge mass of people who haven't had the full picture and have been listening to his every word. Becoming an uncontrollable swarm of people whose sole purpose is to defend him and say why he's doing such an amazing job, and that no one else knows what it's like in developing such a game like his, and that he's doing his very best. And of course, what happens to people who are given strict, unfair rules on what they can and can't say or do? Well, they start a revolution. Over the course of the last year or so, people have been clowning on this man for not putting as much effort into the game as he should, making memes and spamming them around his Discord and Reddit to the point a literal speedrunning category was created to see how quick someone could get banned. I mean, if people are enjoying getting banned from your Discord that much, you are definitely doing something wrong, mate. The current record stands today at 0.30 seconds. Recently, the Yandere Simulator Reddit he bought, in hopes of being able to control every bit of media that went onto it, now got hacked, and the memes, they are glorious. This is genuinely a shame because, as we know, he puts a lot of time into defending himself online against stupid memes and arguments which only further stirs the pot. As memes become more and more popular, he spent more and more time trying to silence people, to the point where I'm sure it will have certainly eaten into his time, where it could have actually been spent developing the game. Furthermore, when a company by the name of TinyBuild came about and was willing to help YandereDev with his mess of a game, it seemed like a godsend. He apparently agreed to take them on in the hopes of making his game better and getting his game unbanned on Twitch. This was deemed very hopeful since it was very obvious at this point that Alex was struggling with the game's development by himself. Alex later talked about the programmers not being able to help much after putting his project on a more updated version of the Unity engine, also claiming that the programmer who did help him did nothing much but change unnecessary bits of code that made it harder for him to understand. Which is completely ridiculous, since if they're there to help make the code more efficient in development, he should be more than happy to keep their changes. After all, they're a games company, and he is one person. He would certainly have a lot of to learn and even develop upon his own skills. Whilst working with TinyBuild, he also believed that the contract would somehow give some mystical power to wipe all criticism of his game off the face of the earth, and he wasn't too happy when people didn't automatically think he was a good programmer when the truth about the contract came about. Despite Alex saying he parted ways with the company on good terms, it has now come to light that he has just found a lot of their work unnecessary and too time-consuming, and it turns out Alex terminated the contract still owing the company $31,000 till this day. So now it's time to find out what I think YandereDev doesn't necessarily need to be criticised for. Yeah, it's probably the first time you've heard that, right? So, first off, spaghetti code and if-else if-else if. And if you are not interested in programming, then you can skip to the timestamp here. But if this interests you, stick with it. So as touched on earlier, as people came more and more fed up with Alex, videos were made either criticising his work ethic or clowning on his inefficient code. To be honest, even though people have found what looks like his atrocious code that eats up valuable processing time resulting in his game performing so awfully, the code really isn't as big of an issue as people are making it out to be. I've touched a bit on game development myself in the past, making my own mobile games in Unity, which is the same engine that Yandere Simulator's made in, and I've slowly learned what is good practice and what isn't generally, either to improve a game's performance by keeping instances of game objects and components that need to be referenced every frame in a static variable, and not making a new reference every frame, or just by simply organising things in such a way that makes it easier to read when I come back to. Now this last one, in my opinion, is the hardest to implement, and has resulted in me spending about an hour on numerous occasions trying to find the origin of one particular problem. From the looks of it, Yandere Simulator's source code is also subject to this issue, and our YouTuber by the way of DYC3 makes a really good video explaining the ins and outs of Yandere Simulator's code, so if you're interested in that, then certainly check it out. I'll leave a link to it in the description below, since quite a lot of what I talk about here comes from his video. So from the video he made a good point about simply replacing the if-else statements with switch cases, which many people think will suddenly fix all the performance issues in the world, and Alex is just a big dum-dum for not being able to switch them up in the first place. But let's be honest, changing this is not going to fix the performance and frame rate issues we see in the actual game. The truth is, the amount of processing time that is reduced by using these cases is negligible, and there's very few cases where it makes sense to replace with a switch case anyway. The truth is, one of the main contributing factors to Yandere Simulator's incredibly long development time is likely due to how unorganised and messy the code is. It doesn't really affect the game's performance that much, but will hugely impact productivity rates. One piece of the code relating to performance that is interesting actually, as DYC3 touches on in his same video, is the fact that the in-game FPS counter takes an average of over like 500 milliseconds to calculate the FPS, and not taking into account the spikes or increases of FPS you can get. Now, this in many cases can result in the FPS actually appearing a lot less than it is. So even when people have been criticising the FPS and the game's bad performance, it wasn't even as low as Alex was making it look. So the funny thing is, he brought that on himself. Well yeah, it's okay saying that, but what about all the Unity assets he stole? Well, let's talk about this, because he's been accused of the past of just simply copy-pasting Unity assets into his project and not actually putting in the work he needs for the models and artwork. But how I see it, using Unity assets that is bought from the store is completely okay to use. Unlike another indie game developer that people keep comparing him to, Scott Cawthon, who made the Five Nights at Freddy's series, he isn't a 3D model artist. He doesn't really know how to create them for himself. He's just a game developer and programmer, not an artist. Therefore, when purchasing assets from the Unity store, which are meant to be used in a game, it really isn't as big of an issue in itself, as long as they were bought lawfully. The only time this seems to become an issue, however, is when he started selling merchandise, which included t-shirts and body pillows with the characters in them, and keeping all the money to himself. The chances of game assets from the Unity store allowing the sales of their assets outside the game without any profit going towards them could be a whole other story. After looking into the Unity asset store's UI myself, it seems that while distribution as part of any physical product is not permitted, the distribution of physical advertising materials solely for marketing those electronic applications or digital media is permitted. By the looks of it, this still looks like he would be in the right to use the assets for what he has done. So all in all, there hasn't really been any harm. Okay, so even if what he's done in the past hasn't all been that bad, what about when LoveSick came along? And yes, when LoveSick came along, this sparked a whole lot of juicy drama. So let's talk about this. After the 6 years of continuous development on what looks like very little progress, some other people in the community decided to take it into their own hands and make a competitor to Yandere Simulator. Someone by the name of Dr Apeis released a video demonstrating his revamped version of Alex's game, and it wasn't long until lots of people got wind of this and started jumping on the YandereDev is over bandwagon. This video caught sight of lots of content creators on YouTube too. Videos started being released claiming that his new version of Yandere Simulator had been created within 2 weeks, and YandereDev became even more of a joke. I mean, yeah, if someone can recreate this game and make it better in 2 weeks, how incompetent does that make him, right? Well, let's just take a look at this from Alex's point of view. And yes, before you gather your pitchforks, hear me out. The truth is, Alex has had to build up the whole game from just a concept over the course of many years, as we know, 6 of them. He made each game mechanic and was the one who brought the idea to life, really. Therefore, when Dr Apeis came along, a lot of thinking had been done for him in theory. He was able to take the assets from the game and start again from scratch, beginning the programming with someone he knew and building it all from the ground up. Now, in all honesty, this is still very, very impressive, given the time scale of 2 weeks they had to reprogram it, whether they took a look at existing decompiled or leaked source code, or did it from scratch, doing all the programming in the time they were given, and also increasing the performance of the game to actually operate at a reasonable FPS. It is still amazing. The assets from the game that we used, however, is a completely different story, and we'll have to touch on that later. I feel like I need to make this point since a very big name in this sort of anime game community by the name of Biju I do not know how to say that, but regardless, he reacted to Dr Apeis' revamped game in a video, which is now removed, and tried claiming that it's the exact same game just with a few slight alterations, and he is very, very evil for doing so, which in fact isn't the case. From a developer's point of view, they have remade the infrastructure that probably made Yandere Simulator so hard to develop and add to, making it better performing and easier to work with. As I talked about before, one of the many reasons Yandere Simulator's development is probably taking so long is because Alex has just made it even harder for himself to continue working on it in the long run due to his unorganised code. Dr Apeis fixed these issues and is said to release a demo with the first rival for their version of the game soon, much sooner than Yandere Simulator's functioning demo with the first rival Osana. Due to Dr Apeis improving on the game's code and further optimising it, the chances are him and his team are going to be a lot more productive in the long run, and they'll be the ones more likely to release a functioning game. And yes, I hear you asking, how is this even allowed? But I personally believe that some of this is right and some of it is wrong. Surely since YandereDev had the original idea and concept, he would be entitled to take the game down, or even file a lawsuit against Dr Apeis. Well, this is another thing that, I'm not saying that, this guy brought up in his video, and the truth is, Alex is within no right to take that game down due to many reasons. First off, is that you cannot copyright a game mechanic or game concept. If this was the case, Nintendo would have copyrighted any games relating to 2D platforming back when Donkey Kong was released as an arcade game in 1981. In theory, Sega could then be sued by Nintendo for the release of games such as Sonic the Hedgehog, which also followed the similar 2D side-scrolling concepts as Super Mario Bros. The truth is, it would be very unfair to allow companies to patent game mechanics and concepts as such. Otherwise, as the world of video games became more and more popular, the chances of any other companies being able to make it big would be near to impossible. We can see many examples of games that have blatantly took the concepts and ideas of other video games, but were still untouchable in the court of law. If you were a child in the year of 2005 to 2017, the chances are you will have played a game called Club Penguin, a click-to-move MMO game aimed at children. And boy did I spend lots of my childhood on that. 2 years later, the absolute travesty of a game known as Bin Weevils came out in 2007. This game literally looks like someone copy and pasted the assets for Club Penguin, hired a 3-year-old with Parkinson's to redraw the game art in MS Paint. Oh my god, it still exists. Look at all my mulch. Similarly, this is how LoveSick has been said to have copied Yandere Simulator. Not in the idea of Dr Apeis being a 3-year-old with Parkinson's, but the idea that he took the game concept and ripped the game off. But unfortunately, that is not how the law works. However, the game started by using a lot of Yandere Simulator's assets, as said before, which is seen as quite bad at first glance. And Alex certainly wasn't very happy. From what we know, all the assets used from Yandere Simulator for using LoveSick have claimed to have been placeholders, just like YandereDev previously had placeholders in the past which he didn't actually have the rights to, but eventually changed, like he talks about in his debunk page. Similarly, Dr Apeis used the assets from Yandere Simulator as a means of a prototype, where he was going to change them in the future. Alex talks about this in his debunk page as being the most blatant theft he's ever seen in the game industry. And yes, from this perspective, if it was true, the assets are completely ripped from the game and used in LoveSick with not much change. A good thing to keep in mind though is that YandereDev did still take assets from other places that he didn't necessarily have permission for to use as placeholders early in development. Like he talks about in his debunk page, he said it himself, meaning even if this was true, Dr Apeis would be just as bad as YandereDev, and YandereDev would therefore be a hypocrite. But actually, when studying all the assets used in Dr Apeis' videos, we can see that none of the assets were actually Alex's own copyrighted material, and they can all be found in the Unity Assets store. Ethically speaking, maybe Dr Apeis ideally shouldn't have stolen the assets from Yandere Simulator. It would have been very possible to show off the new game concept while not including those that belong purely to Yandere Simulator. However, it was a proof of concept, as Dr Apeis says, and he has only done what YandereDev has done, if not better, because he actually owned the asset that he so-called stole. Either way, the game was looking promising, and LoveSick poses a very probable threat to the success of Yandere Simulator, and understandably, Alex was very worried. What comes next though is probably the most disgusting part of this entire ordeal. From the very beginning of this video, I have tried taking both sides into account for a very unbiased and true view on this whole situation. But what comes next is the most shocking part of all of this. It becomes very hard to give two sides of the story for this part. As people started to find out about LoveSick, lots of people started saying things were over for YandereDev. Everybody proceeded to clown on him for his incompetence in game developing as usual. It's something that people are very used to at this point. Usually a fan game such as LoveSick, however, shouldn't be an issue. Just like with other indie game developers, fans have created games just as good as the originals, but at the end of the day, the originals will always be the best from many people's perspectives. Since Yandere Simulator has been in development for so much longer, it would surely be more of a complete game than LoveSick. Assuming that, there would be no problem with a fan game such as LoveSick getting publicity, since Alex's will still always be the original. However, with Dr Apeis publishing a demo and a trailer for what this new revamped Yandere Simulator could be like, with its much better performance and the fact that 2 programmers were working on it, people believe that there was a much higher chance to get a finished game out of these people than YandereDev, who they had been waiting on for 6 years already. The trailer for the game then got struck down for copyright by a music artist and one of YandereDev's mods called Cleveland What. Despite the video being under fair use, YandereDev proceeds to go and write a massive paragraph about how the game is copyright infringement, despite the game using the same assets as Alex bought from the Unity store. Therefore, Dr Apeis doesn't really have any legal obligation to take his word down and not use the same assets as YandereDev. In the end, Dr Apeis uploaded an apology to get this guy off his back and to stop him from harassing him. Since then, Dr Apeis removed the video and has also stated he will use all new assets, none of which come from Yandere Simulator. As soon as YandereDev got wind of Dr Apeis' apology being disgenuine, their conversation through Discord continued. Both parties eventually agreed on making their games slightly different game mechanics wise, so the games could coexist and not be seen as direct competitors. Dr Apeis wanted to make his game more based on social manipulation and interaction to get what you want, which is quite ironic seeing YandereDev's previous behaviour to get what he wants. Therefore, from this point, the games were deemed completely separate, implementing different game mechanics, using different assets. However, that wasn't enough for Alex. Oh no. As popularity for LoveSick, he spoke to Dr Apeis again, this time claiming that Dr Apeis' game and work is having destructive consequences on his life, and that LoveSick is harmful and damaging towards him. He then proceeds to say what looks like him implying that he would kill himself if Dr Apeis didn't stop development. Obviously, because of the way Alex has worded this, he can easily say he never explicitly stated that. Even so, let's have a look at what those statements could mean alternatively. If he's referring to ending his life as in his career as a developer and therefore ruining his life, which he actually does talk about once again in his debunk page, seen here, even if that is the case, it's still just as bad. It's a very disgusting technique of manipulation which has made Dr Apeis crumble, and he felt extremely bad for what he might have done to YandereDev. I mean, I know if that happened to me, I would have to take a step back and seriously consider what I do next. If Alex was genuine, then obviously it's important he gets some help. But from what we have seen from his response on his site, he was obviously never thinking of doing anything of the sort, and there is no way he isn't aware of how that would come across when he sent that message. Since then, Dr Apeis has actually changed the name of LoveSick to Loveletter. Alex wasn't happy with the name of this rip-off game because it was apparently a name he himself was planning to use later down the line in development. Regardless, Dr Apeis being totally in the right to keep this name, he decided to change it to Loveletter, maybe to just finally try and rid himself of anything associated to YandereDev in his game. I honestly don't know. Personally, I think this name is a lot better anyway, and gives off the innocent vibe that a game like that should have in the beginning. This in mind though, it might only be a matter of time before Alex kicks up more of a fuss and claims, "Oh my god, I was just about to change the name of Yandere Simulator to Loveletter, no!" Personally, I can't believe how big this drama has become, because if it was the case between any other 2 indie game developers, they would have discussed things reasonably and come to a civil agreement on what they could do to ensure both their games could exist together, which they did actually seem to have done for a brief moment, which is incredible considering Alex. The truth is, competition is usually very good for upcoming video games. As features get added to the competition, the developer will feel pushed to make their games even better. And the same goes for the competitor. Competition is what allows tech and games companies to develop even better games. They need to outdo each other. Unfortunately, Alex's insecurities have reached such a point where he can't handle any criticism towards his game, as we know. Although granted, he doesn't get as much valid criticism anymore, and more things along the lines of else if, or are you coding son? If his previous actions of trying to control every aspect of the game's community hadn't have happened, maybe this would have been so much more different. I think we all know the main reason everyone is so quick to jump on board with supporting LoveSick is because they are fed up of his dictator-esque ways of controlling his game's audience. People see this as an opportunity to support a developer that won't continue to silence criticism, waste money and waste time. It really is a shame for Alex because He had a great opportunity of creating a game so many people have been looking forward to for years. Maybe if he ever changes his ways and actually handles his audience in a more humane manner, they wouldn't have felt the need to ditch him for a new developer. So lastly, I'd love to know what you think as well. Please let me know, because I'm genuinely interested in this and what your take from this situation. Personally, as someone who is currently aspiring to make more video games of my own, I see this as a perfect example of a situation I would never want to put myself and my gaming, and someone that I definitely do not want to become.